With just a month left of the regular season, the Indianapolis Colts are essentially in playoff mode, and that starts this week with the Denver Broncos. A lot of heads will roll if the Colts miss the playoffs for the fourth time in the past 4 years. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Hicks, your resident film nerd of HorseshoeHuddle.com, and my partner Jake Arthur is our credentialed Crocs on the ground for the site as well. We have a fun show for you guys planned. We're going to talk about who needs to step up on this Colts defense to turn it around here in this final month, who on the Colts offense needs to be a little bit more consistent for their quarterback in this final month of play. But first, Jake, we have a playoff game, essentially a playoff game for the Colts this weekend against the Denver Broncos. Now, the Colts aren't guaranteed a playoff spot by any means if they win this game, but they would essentially be in the driver's seat for that 7th seed in the AFC if they win this game. They'd still be one game back of the Denver Broncos, but the Colts have 3 fairly easy opponents to finish out the year, where the Broncos have the Chiefs, the Chargers, and I think another playoff team in there as well. Like it's a pretty tough schedule for the Broncos. So this is kind of do or die for the Colts this weekend, and there's a lot riding on this. I mean, they're in jeopardy of missing their 4 straight playoffs this season, and this is again with the same general manager, with the second year of the head coach, with the second year of the quarterback. Like it's not like it's a fresh start for everybody here. This is some of these people have been here for a little bit, and then on top of that, man, like the Colts this year have been a really wild ride, and like they still have this glimmer of hope with the playoffs, but now is where they really got to like amp it up because it's playoff time now for this Colts team.
No, it really is. I mean, they're right now the 8th seed out of 7, which sounds super optimistic, but they're 2 games back from that spot. And it's not just Denver. Denver's at 8-5, but so are the Chargers, so is Baltimore, so is Houston. So it's like a huge mess there. So this is very meaningful for the Colts to get this win because that would give them a head-to-head tiebreaker with Denver. They've also got it against Miami. So you have got to have those 2 kind of trump cards in your pocket if it's going to come down to week 18 and a win and end situation. Like this is a must have. We consider this like the must win of must wins because, like you mentioned, they do have 3 relatively easier games. Tennessee, the Giants, who already kind of look like they're packing it in, and then the Jaguars there at the end, who we now know will not have their quarterback likely. So this is the last like super competitive, gotta get up for it game the Colts have. Now we know they're very willing to play down to their competition in those last few weeks. But being 2 games back, if you lose this game against Denver, it's dang near put a fork in them time. You just can't afford to be 3 games back against a team like that.
Yeah, and also I think this is a big game just to see what kind of Colts team this is. Like, don't get me wrong, I think we know what kind of team we have at this point in the season. Like, we're going into week 15. We know what kind of Colts team this is, but when you look at what the Colts have done this season, I believe they're 5-1 this season against teams below 500, and they are 1-6 against teams above 500. This is their last chance against a real opponent, like a real winning football team, to show that you're not this mediocre / bottom feeder in the NFL. This is your last chance to show like we can actually play with some decent teams in the league, because outside of one, I don't even want to say fluky, but when you're 1 out of 7, it seems fluky. Outside of one kind of fluky game against Pittsburgh, when they had their backup quarterback starting that one, the Colts have not fared well whatsoever this year against winning football teams. So this is your chance. This is your last chance this season, or it's just going to be another mediocre, 8 to 9 win season where you only beat up on the bad teams and you become a doormat for all the good teams like we've seen the last 4 years with this Colts roster. So big things riding on this just for this season and just for, the macro of the entire organization. But looking specifically at a couple people, Jake, you and I are of the opinion that Chris Ballard is likely not going anywhere. Shane Steichen's likely not going anywhere. And honestly, Anthony Richardson's probably not going anywhere either in terms of like he's probably going to be the starter again next season. But you still want to see Richardson play well this past month to, bring more assurances for next year. Because if he reverts a little bit back to his early season play, you could see, a veteran, another veteran brought in. So also you could see more whispers and rumors about moving on. But I do think he's shown enough in the last couple of weeks to probably be the guy next year. But you still want to see Richardson play fairly well, obviously, this past month, regardless of win or loss, going for everything that means like next season and maybe playoffs if they do win these games.
Yeah, I mentioned after the last game that I'm getting pretty close to being sold on Anthony getting the keys to be the guy next year. Like, he's shown the growth since his benching. And again, the numbers don't look like how you want them to, but within the context of what they're doing on offense, if the things around him are functioning a little better and guys are coming down with more balls, it's not quite as bad. Like, the numbers aren't going to look great. So I'm not expecting like vast improvement in the numbers, but it's just literally watching how he operates and moves the offense. And those super clutch moments in the fourth quarter and everything, those to me buy you a lot of equity. So just continuing to show stuff like that. Now he does need to keep improving, like not just showing the new baseline that we've seen since, coming back, but building even on that and becoming more consistent, like adding more consistent short yardage stuff in there, not making short throws look difficult, just some building blocks there. But yeah, like you mentioned, Chris Ballard, it's important for him. I don't think he'll go anywhere because it does feel like he's going to be tied to Shane for at least one more year. It would feel, because I'm a little more sold on Shane coming back, but it would feel weird Shane coming back, but not Chris. And any way you look at it, I think that trio all comes back.
Yeah, that's the thing. The trio are all tied together. Like, that's kind of where I'm at too. And as long as Richardson shows that he's the quarterback for next season, the other two will be back as well. But there is one guy we haven't mentioned when it comes to, the main heads of this season, and that is defensive coordinator Gus Bradley. Not Bus Bradley. Gus Bradley. Gus Bradley. He is the one that's probably got the most to gain and the most to lose in this final month of the season. And it starts again this week against the Denver Broncos. If his unit comes out and they show what they've shown over the past couple games, missing tackles, not looking up to the challenge, limiting explosives is great, but not standing tall in the red zone, not creating turnovers, some of the issues we've seen in recent weeks, then I do think that's a logical change the Colts make, where, like, hey, we can't move on from the GM, the coach, or the quarterback because they're tied together. The defense coordinator is not tied to this thing. It's a very separate entity. And yes, Chris Ballard needs to be better at getting more talent for his defensive coordinator, but that's a logical move to make when you have this type of scenario. So I don't think per se like Chris Ballard or Shane Steichen or Anthony Richardson are really coaching or playing for their jobs in this past month. But I do think Gus Bradley is very much coaching for his job in this final month of the season.
Yeah, he definitely seems like he's on the flimsiest tightrope because there's a lot to lose here. Like this team could have a total team letdown against the Broncos, and it would be understandable because that's a really good team. But you're going up against now one-armed Will Levis. You got Tommy DeVito / Drew Lock, and then you've got Mac Jones as your final three quarterbacks. If those dudes look really good against you, that's going to be bad. Yeah. Especially since two of those are AFC South games. We know how Jim Irsay feels about that. That's going to be pretty hard to overcome. So you've got to make these opponents look like everybody else has made them look like. Again, the Denver game could be tough no matter how you cut it. But you can't then have a letdown the rest of the season and just let the snowball get out of control. You have to get back on the horse. And even if you're pretty close to being mathematically eliminated, you got to take care of those last three. That's kind of the only way it feels like Gus comes out on top of this. Otherwise, if those last three terrible opponents, I'll say it, they are terrible offenses right now. If they look good against you, it's going to be pretty tough to overcome.
Yeah, I do agree with you, although I will probably go one step further and say I think it's kind of playoffs or bust for Gus Bradley
Hmm.
in when it comes to his future in Indianapolis, which means winning out and getting a little bit of help. That's kind of the hole the Colts have dug themselves into at this point. But as of right now, we still have a glimmer of playoff hope. So we're going to keep that train riding here going forward. And we're going to talk about some players on the Colts offense that need to step up to help out this young quarterback in the next couple weeks.
Today's episode, of course, is sponsored by PrizePicks. If you love watching the game, you're going to love PrizePicks. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy. Whether it's football, basketball, or any of your favorite sports, PrizePicks makes your holidays bigger and brighter. Here's why you need to check it out. First, money. Obviously, that's why we all do it, other than the love of the game, right? You can now win up to 200 times your money on PrizePicks, which that's incredible during the holiday season. Plus, this holiday season, they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas and offering 2 free picks in December. And when your picks hit, PrizePicks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as fast as 15 minutes. There's not a ton of waiting and red tape, and it makes you nervous when you win something and you don't be able to get it back right away. But PrizePicks does not let you fret over that. So download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly when you play just $5. PrizePicks, run your game. All right, Zach, offensively, this has been a very interesting team. As you mentioned, this has been a roller coaster of a season. No more so on offense to me has it been an instance of disappointment because you've got this guy, so it's like, why is this not working well? So when you look at like Jonathan Taylor, he's got 100-yard game and no rushing touchdowns in the last 5. Now he's come close. He's coming off, I think, a 94, 96-yard game. So like last time we saw him, he looked okay, but he averaged under 4 yards per carry in that game. So we haven't seen any like huge Jonathan Taylor performance in a bit. A lot of that's been the line. They were starting 3 rookies at one point. Looks like they got things figured out a little better in the last game. Ryan Kelly is eligible to return next week. Hopefully he's a bit healthier. So that's one of them. Michael Pittman Jr., very gutty. Like what he's doing this year is great. He's playing through the back injury. It's only cost him 1 game, but his production is clearly not been what it used to be because of the injury, of course. He's got all but 3 games this season are under 50 yards receiving. He has a 113-yard game, a 96-yard game, and a 63-yard game. Other than that, everything else has been under 50 yards, which was surprising even to me as someone who intended to put that bullet point in this today. There's some other guys as well, but to me, really, if Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman Jr. get going in this offense over the final 4 weeks, it will help the Colts immensely.
Yeah, and I think one thing when you look at this Colts roster, something that stands out to me, I don't know if you guys are in the same boat, but something that stands out to me is just the lack of star talent and the star players on this team. And I think the reason for that is you're expecting highly paid guys like Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman Jr. to be those star talents. And this year, they really haven't been those star players for you. Now, there's obviously reasons for that. Jonathan Taylor's had his fair share of injury issues this season. The offensive line has been in flux. The quarterback situation has been in flux. And Michael Pittman Jr. has obviously dealt with his fair share of injuries too. But they got 1 more month to play. 1 more month to play right now. These are star players, or they're getting paid like star players. They really got to step up for the Colts in this final month. Regardless of injury, regardless of what's going on around them, the Colts need more out of these 2 guys in this final month of play. And honestly, I do want to focus in a little bit on Jonathan Taylor because you put him in here, Jake, and I think it's a great call out. Yes, the offensive line has struggled, and I'm not here to say that it hasn't because it has not been great from the offensive line. But when you're paying a running back as much as the Colts are paying Jonathan Taylor, he needs to be able to create more than what he's been creating this season. I think his vision's been very good, but his ability to make guys miss has not been what it was in the past. His explosion doesn't look like what it's been. His overall contact balance has not been what it's been. And they need more of, like, I'm not saying it needs to be 2021 Jonathan Taylor. I would love it to be 2021 Jonathan Taylor, but it doesn't have to be that level of good. but it needs to be higher than what we've seen this year. And just in terms of creating yardage for your offense, like having great vision and great footwork is one thing, but also being able to hit holes with speed, being able to run through contact and create afterwards. I mean, there were a couple runs last week where he got out in the open field and he just had to make one corner miss, and it would have been a huge run for the offense, and he just couldn't make those corners miss. He's getting, tripped up by leg tackles. He's getting taken down by corners in the open field. They need more than that from Jonathan Taylor. It's one thing if if Tyler Goodson or Trey Sermon is getting tackled one-on-one in the open field, but Jonathan Taylor is getting paid too much money to be tackled one-on-one in the open field by some cornerback, especially when the cornerback is like I don't even think this was like Christian Gonzalez. Like it's like the Patriots' second corner. Like, come on. Like, you're Jonathan Taylor. You got to make that guy miss. It doesn't matter who it is even, but even in that context, it's even worse. So they do need more out of Jonathan Taylor. Michael Pittman Jr., hopefully the added rest that this past week gave him leads to a little bit more production this upcoming week. Him and Richardson have connected well. I want to say of those 3 games you mentioned above 50 yards, off the top of my head, all 3 of those were with Richardson. I think one of them was a Steelers game where Richardson got him over 50 yards and then left the game.
Yeah.
But I think the other ones were with Richardson as well. So he has connected fairly well with Richardson this season, and hopefully that can continue. I like that the Colts have mixed in a couple wide receiver screens with him in recent weeks to let him get the ball in his hand a little bit and get going. But I love the call out here, Jake. Getting Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman Jr., those 2 are star players getting paid like stars. They need to show up like stars in this final month for the Colts to make the playoffs.
Yeah, it's just bizarre. They've been so reliant on Anthony Richardson, obviously, but it's like, why are you so reliant on the guy who is supposed to be so supported when you have Pittman, you have Taylor, you have those guys? But a couple other kind of X factors I think would really benefit the Colts down the stretch. A.D. Mitchell, get that turned on, and then literally any tight end at all. It can be a group effort. I don't care. But you can't be working against the progress. You know what I mean? You can't be making weirdly timed dives and missing the ball. You can't be dropping the ball when it's very catchable. Like we've got to get it together here. You just had the bye week. Like, it's too late in the season to be making such like elementary mistakes, it seems. So the tight ends got to get it together. A.D. Mitchell, I mean, he's a rookie, but it's late in the season. They're trying to rely on him. They're trying to get him more work, and with more productivity will come more work. So it's obviously a very talented guy. He gets all that separation still. Just got to come down with the ball and make some things happen.
Yeah, and just to lump it in with A.D. Mitchell and the tight ends, because it's a big part of the conversation with both of those things, it's just the players on offense making plays for the quarterback. This is not an Anthony Richardson apologist type of thing I'm about to say. It's just facts off the last couple of weeks. Anthony Richardson's completion percentage is up 8 percentage points since coming back to the starting lineup. His adjusted completion percentage is nearly at 70% since returning. It's up 13 percentage points. And the big issue is the deep ball hasn't been there. The deep ball has not been connecting since he's back. He's 1 of 13 on passes above 20 yards since returning to the lineup. But here's where the real issue is. It's not really him. He's had 3 drops on passes above 20 yards. He had 2 2 weeks ago with A.D. Mitchell's drop and Kylan Granson's drop. And then technically it wasn't a drop, but the Ashton Doolin thing along the sidelines was a drop in my book.
Catchable, yeah.
Yeah, it should have been a catch. But it's plays like that. Like, these are plays that need to be made for your quarterback. I'm not saying he's a perfect quarterback by any means. He misses his fair share of throws still. But with his improved play, his completion percentage is still kind of the worst in football since returning to the lineup. And a lot of that is his players just not making plays on the ball and not finishing plays. I mean, we are seeing guys week in and week out. I mean, over this past weekend, I was watching the Rams game against the Buffalo Bills. And I know this is a crazy comparison, but Puka Nacua catches everything. Puka Nacua caught everything for the Rams. I was jealous watching that. And then you see on Sundays, the Colts receivers consistently dropping passes and not being at their landmarks. I mean, anytime you throw it to Kylan Granson, it's a 50-50 if he's even going to be looking for the ball when you're throwing it to him. So it's kind of things like that. Like, I'm not saying all these guys need to be as good as Puka Nacua, but it would be nice to see the receivers show up on a weekend. I do think Alec Pierce has done great this season. Josh Downs has been fantastic as well. Michael Pittman Jr. in spurts has been good. They need these other guys to step up, though. Like AD Mitchell, if you're going to get your number called twice a game, you got to make plays on those 2 times, or you're not going to get more than 2 times a game. The tight ends, if you want to be anything in this offense, please, during this final month, catch the ball when it's thrown your way. I think Mo ALIE-COX has done great at catching the ball, but that's really about it. And Mo ALIE-COX isn't getting the separation. He's just catching it when it's thrown his way. So I do think these tight ends need to be much better. I think AD Mitchell, Ashton Dulin need to be better when they're out there. And these guys just need to make plays for their quarterback. I think they've been better at times this season, but it certainly needs to pop up in this final month. Like the supporting cast needs to be very good this final month for the Colts to make this playoff push even possible. But coming up, guys, we're going to shift our focus away from the offense and talk about this Colts defense. Can they turn it around at the right time and catch fire in this final month of the season? We're going to talk about that here in just a second.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets back if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. FanDuel has the Broncos as 4.5-point favorites in this one. And that might be generous. I mean, that's kind of a overarching view of it, but looking at the matchups, we'll see. Both teams coming off of a bye, plenty of time to prepare for each other. So go to FanDuel.com and let them know what you think. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's talk about the defensive side of the ball, which is it's been an enigma this year. They had vast improvement. It seemed like they were carrying the team through the middle portion of the season. And then they've had a couple clunkers in recent weeks. They made the Patriots, which was, statistically, looking at all things, one of the worst offenses in the league, maybe the worst, made them look pretty good in their last game. But, this is their last opportunity to allow that to happen against the Broncos this week. There are a handful of guys who definitely could step up. For me, I look at a couple pass rushers. Dayo Odeyingbo hasn't had a sack in 5 games. Tyquan Lewis is back now, and I'm kind of looking for that lightning in a bottle that he provided last year. Were like super limited sample size because they had a deep rotation. But when he was in there, he was disrupting the backfield. So Dayo, he's a very, very streaky player. When he gets on those hot streaks, he's hard to stop. So you can never have too much pass rush. You can never have too much disruption in the backfield. You get Dayo going, you get Tyquan Lewis going as well. That could be pretty tough.
Yeah, and I love the shout out and I love calling out specific players, but Jake, the biggest thing for me when it comes to this Colts defense is this defense has been at its best this season when they have been creating turnovers. Because look, they're going to give up yards to whoever they play against. They could play against a local rec team in football and they're going to give up a ton of yards. It's just the nature of how this defense is. It is a bend, don't break. It is allow you to go 40 plays down the field on us. But the second you try to push it down the field, the second that you're careless with the ball when you're carrying it, we're going to force a turnover and get the ball back for our offense. And during that middle stretch, following the Jacksonville disaster all the way up until I guess like the Jets game is where I would really say, the Colts were forcing a ton of turnovers. They were getting a ton of turnovers. They were getting sacks. They were getting pressure, and they were standing tall in the red zone. They were a very good red zone defense in that stretch. But what we've seen these last 3 weeks is the turnovers have plummeted. I want to say they've only forced 1 turnover the past 3 games. So Jets, Lions, and Patriots games, I think only 1 turnover, and it was that lucky bounce pick against the Patriots in the red zone. So only 1 turnover. They have not been very strong in the red zone. They've been giving up a lot of touchdowns in the red zone to teams, and they haven't been getting off the field on third down or getting the sacks nearly as much. And I think that's where you're really seeing this defense kind of fall off again and get back to their early season mistakes. So really, it just comes down to anybody on this defense making plays. They need somebody to step up, be a difference maker, and force turnovers. I don't care if it has to be some superhuman effort. I don't care if it needs to be just super lucky like it was against the Patriots on that red zone turnover. Like, whatever it needs to be. But this Colts defense cannot survive unless they're standing tall in the red zone and they're forcing turnovers. So Dio Dangbo, Tyquan Lewis, it can be those guys. It can also be your top players, DeForest Buckner, Zaire Franklin, Kenny Moore. Like, these guys are getting paid big dollars. They got to get out there and force some turnovers, because your bend don't break style doesn't work if you're breaking, every single time. So they definitely need to get the turnover luck back in there. It's almost like, not to go on too much of a tangent here, but it is almost hilarious that the second Anthony Richardson gets back in the lineup, all of a sudden the turnover luck for the defense just deteriorates back down to nothing.
Right.
Why did Joe Flacco get the defense that could force a ton of turnovers, and then Richardson comes back in and his defense can't force turnovers again? Like, come on. But they just need to get back to forcing the turnovers. They were a legitimately really good defense during that middle stretch against some really good offenses, because they were forcing a ton of turnovers. And that's how they were limiting offenses and getting them off the field. But when that turnover luck has fallen back these past couple weeks, you're seeing the issues that have been persistent all season long.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And you look at like a Julian Blackmon, for example. Julian Blackmon and Kenny Moore, those are kind of your biggest fire starters when it comes to getting those turnovers and like uniquely creating them, and they are very good at like baiting quarterbacks. And those numbers just haven't really been there. Like, Kenny's been fine. I think he may only have the one pick though, against the Bills, maybe 1 or 2 picks this year. But those guys, maybe getting in better position. I don't know what's behind it. Like, I can't say they played poorly. Certainly not Kenny, but I just feel like we haven't really called Julian Blackmon's name much. And unfortunately he's been featured in kind of some lowlights. But those two guys, Nick Cross has kind of done a decent job at creating turnovers when the ball's in his area. He's not a guy that's going to like get really creative with it and like bait the quarterbacks like the other guys are. But if he's in the area, he can come down with the ball. So they definitely need those guys. Jalen Jones, kind of as we predicted, he had the 2-pick game against the Bears, but had never had an interception before then and hasn't had one since. That is a huge part of it, man. And that was one of the big problems they had early in the season, was they could never get off of the field. But when those turnovers started to come, like you mentioned, DeForest Buckner got back, the pass rush increased. They were getting some interceptions. When those things came up, that was working. And oddly enough, it feels like the linebackers are the last guys that have really been coming down with the picks. Zaire had one against the Vikings. EJ Speed had one against the Bills. So the DB's got to get back into the turnover creating business as well. I agree.
Yeah. And look, the linebackers have at least been forcing turnovers, but again, here's kind of my thing. If the linebackers and the safeties are already going to be missing a ton of tackles, at least punch with the ball every single time. Like this defense has not been great at tackling this season. So look, if we can't tackle, at least do everything you can to get that ball separated from runner. Like, we got to get turnovers. And then when they get their chances, we need the good luck to jump on the ball and stuff like that. But no, I do think that, like, all jest aside, I do think this is a big final stretch for players like EJ Speed and Julian Blackmon, who are free agents after the season. And I don't really think either player have really made a strong case this season to be re-signed. EJ Speed's had some good moments, but he leads the NFL in missed tackles this season. He has not been particularly great in coverage. Pro Football Focus is very brutal on his overall game this season. And Julian Blackmon, who we all thought was the steal of the offseason with how cheap a contract he got, has kind of played up to the level of his contract essentially this season, which is a near minimum starter for your team. Like, not awful, but certainly not like an impact player. Both those players have a big audition here for the Colts and or other teams in this final month. Like, if they can really stand out, make some big plays, and be part of a team that makes an unlikely playoff push, then they could see like some serious cash come their way this offseason. But if not, I mean, honestly, it looks like Blackmon's probably heading towards another very low contract. And EJ Speed, I'm curious to see what his deal is going to look like this offseason, because I can't imagine it's for much more than like a high-end special team or low-end starter at this point. So not even just talking just for the Colts here, but talking about those guys like prospects in free agency, like those guys need to finish this season strong.
I'll throw Dio into that too, because it seems counterproductive, but just how we know it works with the Colts. Dio is coming into free agency, and he might get a high dollar amount. He could play inside and out, and he's been productive and has had a decent career trajectory. But they've got Samson Ebukam coming back from an Achilles. It seems crazy to let Dio walk because you've got this 30-plus-year-old guy coming back from an Achilles, but I could see it with the Colts. So if Dio really steps up in these next few games and makes it so it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to let him walk, I mean, that would be great. But no, this is a big game for him, or a big stretch for him as well.
Yeah. So, guys, we got the Indianapolis Colts and essentially what is a playoff game this weekend. We're going to be covering / talking about this game all week. It's been a long day, obviously, for me. We're going to be leading everything into this Broncos game because, again, this is the game of the year for the Indianapolis Colts. So we're going to treat it like such this week and talk all about Broncos Colts as long as we can this week. We want to thank you guys, though, for making Locked On Colts your first listen today. Now, for your second listen, go find the new Locked On NFL with 2 shows every day. First, the Madman Tyler Rowland kicks off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. If you guys want to become a Locked On Colts insider and chat with us directly to get that insider scoop, follow the link in our show notes. And if you don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2, all on Twitter. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. We love you guys' ratings, reviews, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow afternoon.